Today we have torn apart on the workbench a Califone model 1035 AV classroom record player. This is one of the last Califone record players that resemble the looks of the traditional style classroom phonograph. The one after this and the one that's still in production, the model 1005 AV, is basically just a Crosley look-alike. Probably came out of the same factory. This particular model plays 3 speeds, 33, 45, and 78 RPM. We have a play and pause switch. We have a microphone input, an auxiliary input, and an external speaker output, as well as controls for microphone volume, tone, and volume. We also have a variable pitch control and a strobe. And the pitch control has a detent for normal speed. One of the things I don't like about these later Califone players is the fact that they use DC motors. I like the older versions with AC motors. They give less trouble. And unfortunately, this one was made in the wrong country. It wasn't made in the United States. But it's still a better quality unit than a Crosley. Of course, it wouldn't take much to be better than that. When I got this thing, the person I got it from said they couldn't get it to work. And when I first plugged it in, it would not power up. It was totally dead. And then I turned it on a second time, and it was totally dead. And then it miraculously started operating. Well, I opened it up and really couldn't find anything wrong, so I resoldered a couple of semi-questionable solder connections on the fuse, as well as sprayed control cleaner on all of these potentiometers, and it seems to be working now. And beating and banging on it has no effect, so maybe it was just a bad solder connection or a dirty power switch. Who knows? And as you can see, this model still uses the track light tone arm, which obviously is a little light to illuminate the stylus. I think that feature went into production sometime around 74, 75, and remained in production till at least 2005 or so. Found something on the internet advertising these players. It was copyrighted 2005, so I figure these were made at least until then. But after that, they pretty much went with the Crosley look-alike. Here's the underside showing our power transformer, our pitch control pot. There's our motor control board that contains the speed adjustments for the motor. At least this one has a separate control board instead of the control circuitry built inside of the motor, which is the case with the current cheap Crosleys. There's our little bitty DC drive motor. Now, I'll have to admit, seeing that little bitty motor in a classroom phonograph just takes something away from me. I want to see a AC shaded pole motor under here, but they haven't used those in Califone record players since the late 80s. Here's our amplifier chassis. It uses just a single IC for the audio output. And another thing that's different about the newer ones versus the older ones usually had a 6x9 inch speaker mounted on a spring suspended sounding board, which gave good bass response. And it also helped prevent feedback from the needle. These newer ones have 2 4-inch speakers mounted directly to the case of the player, no spring suspended sounding board, so that's another thing that's changed in the way these players are made or were made versus the old versus the new. And also the turntable platter is plastic, which I think Califone started doing that in the late 70s. Actually, I don't know what their deal was. It might have been whoever they could get platters from, but I've even seen some of these turntables, or should I say record players would be a more proper term, but I've seen some of these that actually had a metal platter. So I I think it just all has to do with when they were made and who their supplier was at the time. Here's our drive mechanism. We still use an idler-driven turntable, but obviously not the stepped kind of drive mechanism that's in the older models, since this has an electronically controlled motor that determines the speed. I guess I'll give this the usual mechanical treatment that I give all of them. I'll use some rubber renew on the idler, take the spindle out, clean the bearing out, re-lubricate it, and get it all ready to go. Okay, last but not least, I had to tweak these master pitch adjust pots a little bit. The turntable pitch was just a tad bit off, so I think this thing's ready to go now. Okay, one other thing I did to this player was I substituted the 89T cartridge that was in here for one with an LP stylus on one side and 78 RPM on the other. The original one had a dual LP stylus, and in my opinion, when a record player has a 78 RPM speed setting, then it should have the proper 78 RPM stylus. At least if it's one I'm going to be using, because I have 78 RPM records. Now if someone winds up with this who only owns LPs and 45s, then I might just put the LP stylus back in here and save the other one for my players. But here we go with a 45. Here's our pitch control. Here we are with an LP. And for such a small motor, it has decent startup torque. Finally, a 78.
How's about cooking something up with me? Hey, sweet baby, don't you think maybe we could find a...
Now, the nice thing about having a pitch control on a phonograph that plays 78s is a lot of earlier 78s are not recorded at exactly 78 RPM. So, having this pitch control is handy if you're playing 78s that fall into that category, so you can get the speed exactly right on them.
It's a brand new recipe. I got a hot rod Ford and a $2.
Okay, here we go. The Califone 1035 AV record player all fixed up and ready to go. Thanks for watching, and more to come later.
One day he's coming home, the glorious day. My Lord, one day from heaven up to Calvary's Mount. My Lord, one day from heaven to die on the tree. My Lord, he suffered in pain, was despised and rejected. One day he's coming home, the glorious day. My Lord is dead, and then he died to save.